that's original because most people don't write about it, but you felt it. Think about that stuff. You don't want to tell the reader, here is a story that you've heard before. You want to go, listen, listen. I know you, you know me. Now come along, come along. We see ourselves in the real stuff.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Let's Fix Stories. This is the podcast where storytellers bring their stuck, tangled, or not quite their stories, and we help them figure out what's working, what's not working, and where to go next. I am one member of the One Brilliant Arc story team. My name is Jaylon.
I'm Charles, so hello, everyone.
And we have a special guest with us today. We have Kennedy Fish. Kennedy, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your writing?
Yeah. Well, I'm Kennedy, as we've just discovered. And I am trying to write a medieval set fantasy adventure story. And it's coming. Slowly but surely.
That's awesome. I'm very excited about the medieval setting. I'm curious, we usually ask our guests just to like kind of get the purpose, the story behind the story. What was it that made this story speak to your soul and just let you know like it had to be written?
Well, this story is a bit unique because it's very old. I started writing it, I don't know, like 8 years ago, and I took like 3 years off. So I stopped writing it for 3 years, and I've come back around after graduating from college because I suddenly find myself with a lot more time after I'm done with work. And I I just never let go of the characters because I wrote the story for one character in particular. Um, and he was created for a completely different tale that I thought that I was going to tell. And that was, I don't know, middle school maybe. And I just wanted to express, I think, who I was and my journey in a way, but a little more exciting. And I wanted everything to be more dramatic. And so I created this character and I needed a story for him.
I think that's really awesome. Did you also have that experience where it's actually funny, a lot of writers say that their stories that they bring us are many, many years old and they also like sat in a drawer for several years. So did you also have the experience where like you came back to what you had written, and you had just entirely new eyes and new inspiration and then new thoughts about what you had written before?
Yes, absolutely. That is exactly what it sat in Google Docs for a few years, and I'm just coming back to it, and it's changed a lot just in about 6 months.
So do you have any particular goals for this story? Are you just looking at you want to get it written because you want to see yourself on the page that way and have that personal accomplishment? Are you looking at publishing? What's the dream there?
I want to finish and publish because I know it's a story that I would have really loved to read when, I mean, even now, but I was a bigger reader when I was younger. And I really loved the medieval stuff. And I know a lot of people who feel the same way, and a lot of people who have experienced a lot of the same things as I have in life and who think similarly. And I think that the story that I have to tell could be a really great one for them. So it's for me, but it's also for people who I know are like me.
Mm. I find that the best stories that people do say that they needed were the stories that the writer said they needed first. And when they wrote something that they wanted to read and they needed to read, that's what made it mean so much to other people. I think that's the best ingredient for success there. All right, I'm going to ask you a question, and I apologize because I also know as a writer it really stinks talking about your book because it's like suddenly you have all these words and you can't sum it up. But give us just, if you don't have an elevator pitch, give us like a quick synopsis, maybe a few sentences to a few paragraphs about what your story is about for our audience who has not read the sample that we've had.
It's basically very simply about I was gonna say kid, but I guess a young adult, who doesn't know that he's out of place, until he and a very new friend that is more of an acquaintance, the two of them stumble into kind of where he is supposed to be, but he didn't know that. Um, and they end up on this kind of roller coaster to get back out, because even though there's so much about this new place that really calls to both of them and makes them feel more at home than they thought that they could, they also have a life back where they've come from. They have family, they have pursuits that can't take place in this other world that they're in. And they're kind of tossed into this kind of chaotic story where the way out is unfortunately through a tricky situation that doesn't involve them until they get themselves involved in order to get past it. And they meet quite a collection of interesting people along the way.
That's awesome. That sounds like an exciting story. And you
Yeah,
did
so,
great summing it
so
up.
I was gonna say, and this ties into my analysis of the sample that we had. So as a quick DL, a dude is in it's our world, and a dude belongs somewhere else, and they get sent to a different world, and they're trying to get back. So it's like a Wizard of Oz thing, and sort of like, but if Dorothy actually belonged in Oz in terms of emotionalness, did I hear that correctly?
Yeah, it's I never would have thought of that analogy myself, but yes.
That's
It's quite a
very
bit like that.
interesting. Yeah, I bring this up for a reason, but we'll get into that. But that's very interesting. Well, like I said, well, I'll get into why I bring that up.
Well, to cue you up for getting into it, we will jump into giving you our notes. Usually, the way this works is we'll start out with, we'll first talk about what we read in the sample that's working, and then we'll talk about what we read in the sample that needs to be stronger. And then at the end, we'll take an analysis of what the theme of the story is, what the emotional impact is, what the purpose of this story is, to make sure that everything aligns on your theme. So again, I think we talked about this a little bit before we started recording, but we also give our disclaimer every episode. This is not supposed to be like us telling you how you have to fix your story. This is a conversation, because when it comes down to it, the writers are the ones who know the answers for their own stories, and we're just here to help you find them, help you brainstorm some solutions. And it's not supposed to be us talking to you. It's supposed to be a conversation. So if you have any insight to give us, if we say something, we may not have all the information. So feel free to jump in, interrupt us, give us more information, ask questions. Um, yeah, just to make it a brainstorming session. Okay, so let's jump in here. Charles, I will let you kick us off with what you found in the sample that's working.
So, what I found was interesting about the whole text was it felt like I had seen a lot of this before, but it didn't feel like the text. And when I say text, by the way, I mean like the actual words rather than the story is different from the text. So they're kind of interchangeable, but they're not. Anyway, sorry. But it felt like the piece was not demanding that I fall upon the ground and worship its lore, which I thought was very interesting. And it's so funny too. Like I am so uninterested in characters with dreams for fantasy stories, and yet, um, Kingdom Hearts, one of my favorite fantasies, one of the more foundational fantasies, one of my favorite video games since I was a kid. I'm like Generation One fan, starts with that. Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, or is it Link to the Past? I can't remember. One of the Zelda games starts out like that too. And even something I did in second grade starts out like that. But the reason I bring that up is it was interesting. Like the way this was presented, I was like, oh, okay, it's going to be a young kid who needs this. And then it's like an adult and law firm, his mom. And I'm like, okay, that's different. And it was interesting because as I read it more and more, and there's it's solid writing, it's a solid foundation. It's just building it up, and we'll get into some recommendations of how you can build that up. I do appreciate the questions you left in the Google Doc, which were very encouraging. But something I liked as a whole was that it felt a little different. It felt a little less kind of in your face sort of a style. It felt a little bit more um, grown-up fairy tale toned, which I find very fascinating. I kind of liked that it starts the sample that we got that Alex sees Katie, is that correct?
Yes, Katie.
Yes. Want to make sure I got that right. Um Katie, he throws herself at her because he has kind of an objective, which I thought was very different, very interesting. Instead of him being passive, Alex has an interest, and it's like he's fascinated with this. He's focused on this dream, this nightmare, but it's not everything in his life. And the reason I bring it up is that's how an adult would work. Unfortunately, it's like, do you want to focus on this mystical thing? Absolutely, but money. And there are little details like that I liked, both in textual or technical descriptions, as well as this feeling of being trapped. And for the record, I highly one of the reasons I brought that Wizard of Oz comparison is I am fascinated, very very moved, by this feeling, especially for adult characters of any story, any kind of story, where they feel like they don't belong somewhere. um, I have a major idea that is somewhat similar in that spirit. There's a recent film I saw called I Saw the TV Glow that's all about that, which is absolutely freaking brilliant. So you scratch that itch. And the reason I brought up this comparison of belonging somewhere, that's side note, that's fascinating because usually characters want to go somewhere or they kind of end up there accidentally or something. Or if they either end up there accidentally or if they belong there, it's part of a great heroic quest that they have to fulfill and they find themselves there, which is fine. But your description matched it scratched further itches I had from the text because I was wondering, they're following this wolf and this, and I was like, okay, where is this going? And it was kind of interesting because it wasn't what I expected. I thought it was gonna go kind of in this direction, and you patiently waited. You patiently led me along, and I was curious of where all this was going. So then you bring your pitch up, and I find that fascinating because now I'm thinking like he belongs there. Fantastic. Does he want to be there? What is exactly pulling them back? And the journey home is interesting too because again, it's something I've always found really fascinating of that sense of you end up in a fantasy world, but you want to go home, um, for various reasons. But when it's just something that really fascinates me. And I thought the biggest thing I liked of the sample was it was a compelling setup, and I wanted to know who Katie and Alex were more in a really good way. And I wanted to know, like, where does this go? Because it didn't feel like you were going, it's a brand new thing. It felt, here's the story. And that kind of that simplicity, some simplistic plate design for this meal that was offered to me was really compelling. And I wanted to know what it is. And now that you have that pitch, now I'm even more curious of where all this comes from. And I now that I think about it, I think I had this thought, but I couldn't express it before. I think a lot of it comes from the setup that again you took your time and that really, really intrigues me. Also, even though I know that you had said in the doc um that the blue text was more summary to build off of and et cetera, I didn't think so Alex is this guy, and Katie's the female of the story, you could say. Um, I read that bit of their, we'll call it a date for the sake of simplicity. Um, and I read it and I was like, yeah, this works. This is interesting. Like I started to understand this wasn't going to be another common, sort of cup of tea, or it wasn't going to be um tea in an ordinary cup. And I thought that was very interesting. And that again came from stopping, taking your time, building it up a little bit more instead of just going bam, 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 bam. Let's get to the fantasy. Let's get to the adventure. And so yeah, you've enticed the curiosity in me, which is very good. Very good start.
Definitely. All right. I'll let you. Do you have any thoughts, Kennedy, before I jump in?
Yeah, I just it's really funny that you say that because originally I had written like several years ago before it went on pause. I had written a prologue that was in the medieval half. It was in the medieval world, and then we cut back, and this was back when I was writing these characters as teenagers, because that's what I was. Um, and after I let it sit for like 3 years, and I came back to it, I was like, this doesn't feel right. Like I don't know anybody. I've been introduced to a lot of characters, and I don't necessarily feel connected to them at all, or I don't feel like I know them. I don't feel like I have any idea of what their goals are in life. And that's kind of why this part in particular has had such a heavy rewrite, is because I wanted to give them lives. Like I wanted them to feel like they were worth the story. So it's cool that you say that, because that's like a major part that has changed.
That's awesome. Well, that's funny because I was going to start out my list of what I felt was working with the prologue. I think that the prologue being a letter from someone's love or someone who wants to be their love.
Totally forgot about that. That was brilliant. I don't know what that
Right?
was, but I was like, okay, I think I know where this is going. And like it kind of started, and I was like, okay, it's gonna be one of those things. But then I got to the end of it, and I was like, okay,
Yeah.
what is this? Very interesting. I totally forgot that. I apologize. It was very interesting.
It was a very, very good prologue. It did very well at piquing our interest in the right way and got us asking the right kinds of questions for this story. And I think that it jumped out because it was something so heartfelt and honest that we've all experienced, because we've all begged someone silently, if not out loud, please just like me, please forgive me. And I think that that's just such a human experience that it, we don't like to talk about, but it's so intrinsic to our souls. Like, I recognize that as a feeling that I could relate to, even though I've never had to write a letter like that. And I think that that's what made your prologue stick out so much. And it was a great hook for your story. I will also piggyback off of what Charles said with that dynamic between Alex and Katie, especially in their earlier interactions. The awkward energy was really palpable, and it made it believable. Like I was cringing as I was reading, but I was also endeared, and I could like see it playing out, and it felt like a believable dynamic because you really nailed that awkward energy that they had. Um, Another thing, this just made me chuckle. And this is probably because of like my history with it. But with the lottery winnings of Katie's father, you started explaining like what they did with their winnings. And one of the things was they started to eat organic. And I just had to laugh at that because I understand very much so, because our whole family was having to eat organic for a while because of my mom's health. And that was something that, like, it's the little luxuries that shouldn't be luxuries, but they are. And those kinds of funny and relatable and insightful details to your character's world is very powerful, because it elicits those kinds of responses in readers. So I thought that that was your best detail given in the story, in my personal opinion. And I think that if you make all of the details that you mention feel like that, where it's like it's a very small thing, but it's a clue to something bigger. And you don't have to mention the bigger thing, but you have that sense of there's something more to this. Like, you just said a few words, and yet I laughed because I pictured all of the other words and feelings behind it. And I think that that shows your skill for pulling readers into your world with very little details. And that was really great. Um, Last thing on my list, I felt from when I started reading that you had a very poetic style of writing. It felt artistic and smooth, and there were some moments where I would have said just be careful that doesn't become so flowery that the meaning of your words is softened, but the words themselves and the way that they flowed um, felt very smooth and artistic. So I could tell that your writing style itself is very well developed. Seems like it's a natural talent to you. So that's my list. Um, Anything else? Any other thoughts?
I do have a tendency to write a little flowery. That is very true. That is very true. You've got me there.
I do as well.
I try not to go too crazy, but it's hard because I like it. I
Mhm.
just enjoy getting all up in, and then it's too much, and I'm like, hold on, slow down. You don't have to say everything like you're from 300 years ago. It's okay.
I think a lot of that does come down to, though, if it's your style, totally like lean into that. Write in a way that makes you happy, that makes you feel like yourself, like you can recognize yourself in your words. But again, you would only have to dial it back for the reason of if you're softening the meaning of your words, then it's a problem because it's getting in the way of what your words are trying to convey. But until it reaches that point, it's a very beautiful writing style.
Well, thank you.
Of course.
Thank you.
All right. Well, Charles, you want to kick us off with what's not working? This is the whole dun 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 moment of.
Yeah. So mainly this is something that comes up a lot of episodes and I sound like a broken record, but I don't it's not a broken record so much as that this is the core of everything. Is mostly just what you were saying about flowery language is execution of the text. And the other thing is with a fantasy, um how do I put this simply? Fantasy is a misunderstood genre. You have people who think it is girly and therefore bad and over the top and therefore unrealistic, and not relatable. So, and it's I won't say riddled with cliches, but I feel fantasy comes from our childhood make believe, playing outside, going, playing with toys and daydreaming and stuff. And I think that kind of can make it not get to the heart of the matter. And the heart of the matter that fantasy could do is several things. Like, the great fantasies are ultimately about love and the power of love against impossible evil. But if you fumble the presentation, if you fumble the execution, a lot of that stuff can kind of get lost. So most of the notes that I had really were kind of technical ones as well as some answers to that. So for example, so on flowery language, I think something to really think about is don't view it as 300 years ago. So there's a writer, he died in 2018. He's hugely influential. Nobody knows him except, the OGs, I guess you could say. He was brilliant, and he was Harlan Ellison, and he was the definition of cantankerous, and he would have ridiculously brilliant, detailed insults that probably went over the people's heads that he was insulting, and he was of the modern time. And when people used insults back in the day, they were modern time, or when they used descriptions. So, um, the whole famous Shakespeare, shall I compare thee to a summer's day? That was, yeah, Shakespeare was using high-end language that was understood to be highfalutin and not realistic. But as a whole, it was common to them. It's always common. Whatever you think is old was once common to people. So keep that in mind when you describe things. To this end, though, I will say again, at least for me, and I've been a fan of the fantasy genre for all my life. But avoid cliche descriptions, which is common, but stick with me here. Because when you do that, it pigeonholes the piece, and it's like telling me we're gonna do the same story again and again. So put it this way, right? Everyone and their mother has seen, um some version of Cinderella. We've all seen Cinderella, right? Everyone knows the story of Cinderella. And if you want to do Cinderella straight, that's fine. But even if you're going to do it straight, you gotta have a little bit more pizzazz because otherwise, why bother? I'll just go check that out. And it's that kind of thinking that brings us something like, say, Ella Enchanted. Um, so to this end, for example, here's what I mean. In the opening, the dream, instead of using one haunting piano note, think about that. That sounds poetic, sounds flowery, but think about boom, that's one piano note. What if it was two? Boom, boom. bum, bum, instead of gasping up right a bit. So we've seen it a million times. There's a Simpsons joke about that, right? Where the characters say, don't forget the standard scream, and Bart Simpson wakes up screaming. Everyone's done that where they go, right? But think, have you ever done that before? And if you have, okay. But in my experience, right, if I wake up in a night after a nightmare, I freeze and I go, like, can't move and I don't know where I am. And the reason I bring that up is that's original because most people don't write about it, but you felt it. Think about that stuff that you feel because you want, especially in the opening, you don't want to tell the reader, here is a story that you've heard before. You want to see a story and you want to go, listen, listen, I know you, you know me. Now come along, come along. And that one of the ways to do that is they go, "That is me. That's what I do." So instead of going gasping right out of bed, do something that maybe more people would know a little bit more. Um, you can have them grasping at the pillow or something. Anything to shake it up, and that's also a sense of fun. This isn't just about getting things right. It's also about having fun. So and you can go crazy all you want. Um, you can make a splendid cartoon. The fantasy world they go to can be like Roger Rabbit's Toontown, for all I care. For all anyone cares, because it's great and that's fun. Who cares? Do it. If it's fun, it's great. But you have to make the humanity real if you want to make something more than just a cartoon. Um, so we see ourselves in the real stuff. So for example, this is just me personally, and I brought this up many, many times in past episodes. There's a middle-aged woman with graying blonde hair. Well, maybe we could shake that up because I feel like I've seen that a few times. But specifically too, which leads to my more important point about the technical presentation. I don't think if we're following Alex, I don't think Alex would see his mother and go, "That's a middle-aged woman with graying blonde hair." Now, it's a good description for, instead for us, but maybe you could package that, and I recommend packaging it in a way that he would see. So, frankly, somewhat with my mom, who I think she's turning 60 next year, I remember when she didn't have white in her hair. So when Alex sees her, he sees that and he goes, she used to have, sunflower hair, which is a poetic flowery description, literally a flowery description. But he sees her differently. And that automatically tells us what she looks like, how old she is, and how Alex feels about it. Because maybe that's regretful to him, as he thought she was going to be young forever in his mind. In my brain, I still see my mom as, the 30-year-old that she was when I was a little kid. So that's kind of a part of that. I did have a question. Please help me out here. Maybe I misread something because this happens. The family can't afford a car, but he went to college. Did I miss something? And I'm forgetful because again, I've been teaching kids all day, but did I miss something about that? They can't afford a car, but he went to college?
Yeah, I think it's more of a community college scholarship situation.
Okay. Yeah.
I didn't do the math because I went to college for free.
Mhm.
So I got in somewhere and like I went 100% for free. So it's like I know there are options. I just haven't done the work to find the right option for them.
Yeah. And that's a thing too of okay, here's a personal thing. There will always be the Reddit people who go, yeah, question, question, question. That's not the point. But you do want to have certain kind of logic in this case. So basically, in this case, the reason I bring it up is if he can go to something as luxurious and a scam, college is a scam. I want that on the record. Sorry, but anyway, if he can go to something like college, but he can't afford a car, what happened? And it feels kind of dissonant. Those are the questions you don't want because you want the audience to go like this with their popcorn. hmm you want them to follow and not stop and think. Um, so little details like that. And to that end, if you have a question, if something doesn't make sense, see if you can spin it. Make it something interesting. Because then this is what happens when a reader sees something and go, well, why is that the case? And you go, it's because this really interesting thing that happened to them. They go, what interesting thing that happened? And now it's something even deeper.
Mhm.
Again, to this end, I'm just kind of quick notes here about descriptions. I recommend following what Alex sees, not what is. So for example, a man, even he's not attracted to her, a man doesn't look at a beautiful woman and describes exactly what she sees. She was 5'3" and she was wearing a red dress. No, no, no. He poeticizes her. He romanticizes her. Even if he's not attracted to her, it doesn't have to be romantic, but if he notices, if anyone, even me, like I'm a boring straight guy, you see like a handsome guy, you go, wow, marvelesque, you know. Um, so think about that. Guide us through. I saw a lot of technical descriptions in the text. And I know that comes from doing a lot of summary, as you said, but I would recommend from this point on, build from that. Let me know, how does Alex see the world? It can still be third person, but describe it through that lens. Don't tell me what's going on or what it looks like. Send me there. And for the record, this description of a car pulling up was really, really great. So one of the examples I had was the sentence is, he never could have expected they moved to a place like this, a quaint, middle of nowhere town surrounded by forests and framed by mountains. Framed is not a bad sentence, but again, that's a very dry description, something I'd find in a map. So a thought, this isn't a thought you have to go to, and honestly, I didn't even think it was that good a sentence. But for example, how does Alex feel about the town? You can say, he never expected to end up in a tacky town in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by too many trees and in the distance, mountains he has not gotten used to yet. Again, not the best example of a sentence, but just describing, now I know there are trees, now I know the mountains, it's a random town, but it shows kind of his disdain, that sense of he doesn't belong here because he hasn't gotten used to the mountains, something like that. Speaking of terms of cliches, again, you can take cliches, but spin them a little bit, have fun, use that imagination. After what seems like an eternity, every time I read a phrase like that, I tune out. I've seen that a million times before. And how does an eternity end if it's endless? Doesn't make sense. So, for example, again, emphasize feeling after the longest seconds of his life. Again, not the best description. I was kind of popping off my head here, but longest seconds. Because a second's supposed to be instant, but if it's long, there's many, suddenly we know he's tired. He's tired. Try stuff that emphasizes the awkward terror of slow time. Because when you're in slow time, when you're stuck in something like a horrible, horrible meeting, sorry, again, administration, not great. Um, you notice everything around you. Again, also, here's another example. His mom tells him when the day he goes to see Kitty, have fun, my dear. Try a nickname. What nickname does she have for her son? That she's probably called him that for ages. So, for example, my mother will still call me Punk because she used that when I was like 3 years old. It lasts, but also creates a sense of history. So, you want to deliver these things, just little pockets for the reader to pick up on, and they start making connections and building and building. Um, so the one other thing that, because you had a question in this, and I'm sorry if I am going a million miles per hour here again, um, a little scrambled here. Elon will tell you that these notes will be available, so not to worry. But you made a comment on, let me see, I believe it was on exposition. Give me just a moment. Checking the doc now. I want to get this quite right. How much exposition is necessary in this section? Here's my recommendation. So, to make this kind of quick, are you familiar with The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring, the film?
I am familiar, but
Okay,
I think I've only seen it once.
okay. So, in a nutshell, I was 6 years old when that movie came out. I never heard of Lord of the Rings. I see this prologue that establishes the whole shtick of the piece, and I got it instantly. And the reason I bring this up is look at that prologue of Fellowship, because it's such a great example of how to explain things in a wondrous way. But also specifically, as a Tolkien geek and a Middle Earth nerd, I know all of these little details and all these little threads and little connections and little da, 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 in this prologue, right? And it doesn't matter. None of that matters, right? So, for example, right, the opening describes the rings, right? And it says, 3 were given to the elves, and 7 for the dwarf lords. And here are the descriptions of who the elves are and the dwarf. The elves are immortal, the dwarves live in the mountains, and men are kind of screwed up, right? That's all we need. We don't need to know anything about the lore. We don't need to know anything else, and we get it. Because all we need to know is the specific conflict. Another example of this, or actually that's a little bit different. But so basically what I'm saying is exposition is on a need to know basis. You don't need to tell every single bit of your history lore, because then it's a manual. And No one bought your book to read a manual. We want to hear a story. Another way of explaining this is in Star Wars, the very first film of Obi-Wan and Luke, and they're talking, and Obi-Wan describes, here's the Force, here's the Jedi, here's the rise of the Empire, the death of the Jedi, Darth Vader, my apprentice, your father was a Jedi, clone, blah, 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 right? It's kind of dumb. From a certain perspective, that's not how you deliver exposition. But notice it's taken very sincerely, and it's delivered not like, once upon a time, here's the history lesson. If you check your index on page 44, you will find the section on lights. That's not what it is. Obi-Wan talks about their shared history as people of the galaxy like it's a true history that happened to them. So really, all he actually says is a few lines. He says, the Jedi were guardians of peace and justice in the Old Republic. That's it. We don't need to know about any Jedi temple, this, that, lore, all the background books, comic, blah, 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 blah. You don't need that. Just give the audience enough that they need to know it and they want to know more. You guide them in on a rope. Because basically what you want to do is you want to tell the reader a story as if they were a little kid. It doesn't matter if, okay, there's a little bit of a dark example here, but like even Schindler's List, based on real history of an atrocity of atrocities, you still watch that movie with the attention of a little kid because the little kids will be deeply involved in a story. And the older you get, the more detached you become. The trick of a great story, especially for stuff that's about adults, and by the way, thank you for making them adults. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Various reasons why. But the trick of it is you have to trick the audience into letting go none of the disbelief. Because that's different. You know, we're reading a book. It's our real characters. Come on, everyone's disbelieving. You want them to suspend their cynicism and you want them to fall into the story. And how you do that is by giving those little clues. And they're fun. They're fun little clues, fun little piece of exposition. Don't dump everything at once. Make a little breadcrumb trail. And finally, on dialogue, to this end, this kind of ties in with "Have fun, my dear." Um, mind the nature. That's basically the thing, is the nature. Something I just did as I'm preparing for the next phase of this 10-year project I've been on is my dialogue. Oh man, I chop that up again and again and again. And I just looked through my dialogue and I looked at it and I said, people, no, we gotta cut this word. We have to cut that word. No, can we say a little bit less? Do we have to say anything at all in this moment? Because people don't talk like a script. They ramble like I'm doing now. And they have non sequiturs and they have all different kinds of ways to talk. So usually it's mind its nature. If you are going for Katie and Alex are real people of a real time, and again, you've done a great job of setting up their history in an interesting but relatable way. So you're already on track there. Um, you don't want to be over the top with the dialogue, or you don't want to be very robotic with the dialogue. You could be dry, but or actually think not robotic, think apathetic, because no one talks like this. They go, yeah, no one talks like that. They apathy, not roboticness. Um, and also for the record too, final point here. If you want to go flowery language, believe in the flowery language, but convince me. For example, I just for the first time ever this Saturday, I saw Kill Bill, The Whole Bloody Affair. I've never seen those movies. I saw this whole thing, and the dialogue is so over the top. The whole nature of the piece is over the top, but that's the nature of the piece and you believe in it because you believe the dialogue. Dialogue totally works because it's its nature, and the piece goes, "This is what I am, and we're gonna have fun with this." So as long as you and your characters believe the dialogue, you'll be fine. Just mind your nature. What is the nature of the story? What is the tone that you want to share? And share is a good word because you want to bring everyone along with you. You don't want to push them. You want to kind of keep them together in the group. I'm so sorry that I went on kind of a bit of a TED Talk lecture there. But that is my whole foundation there. I hope that helps, and I didn't just talk your ear off. So I'm done now. And to prove I am,
I I was honestly waiting for you to mention the dialogue because I have had dialogue is the bane of my existence. I hate it because when I started writing this, I didn't talk to people. I write exactly how I talk, and I don't talk very often. So that's something that I am still working on. Um, so I was kind of expecting that one to come up at least one time.
I think another example too, my two recommendations, find a few people you like to listen to. So do you like writers, artists, musicians, actors, anyone in particular that you could find in a podcast?
Sure, I could. I mean, I'm sure I could find someone.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
it's it's not exactly what you're looking for, but you can find different rhythms. For example, oh, I cannot remember her name right now. Um, the madam who voices Louise Belcher in Bob's Burgers, she was on a podcast with Michael Rosenbaum a few weeks ago. She sounds exactly like Louise Belcher, but of course, she doesn't play that character. She's talking like a real person. You can listen to that. If you don't like to talk to people, totally fine. Try to listen to other people. If you go out, try to listen to their conversations. Listen to the words. Listen to anything. And if at the end of the day, if you have to, I'll just use my desk examples here. Take a figure, and just play. This is Katie. This is Alex. Just kind of build it like that. Constantly have fun. That's why I bring up the figures here, is have fun. Because once you start having fun, it's a game. And when you're having a game, your brain fires on all cylinders. And you go, let's try this, let's try this, let's try this. Editing comes later. Let us
Yeah.
handle the editing, that
Yep.
kind of thing. But that's my recommendation. And for the record, the fact that you understand dialogue's the bane of my existence, and I don't really like to talk to people and I struggle with it, you're on the right path because now you understood a weakness, not a weakness, let's not say weakness, a struggle of yours. And
Well, I
you can
mean,
now build it up. You can
I
build it up.
think it's so funny that you say that because it's so honest. And I think that all of us writers have felt it, and yet no one's brave enough to say it because the reason we become writers is because we don't want to talk. So, of course, dialogue is not going to come naturally to us. Of course, it's going to be the bane of our existence. And I think that there are a lot of people who struggle with that. Like, you're not alone there. It's not something that only you have to overcome and like you're way behind everyone else. Like Charles said, you're ahead of everyone else because you recognize like this is something I have to pay extra attention to make sure that it's enjoyable for someone else.
Yeah.
So
And not to talk anymore, but and also the whole thing about him trying to get a ride with her, that's totally real. Like how like, no, I can do this, man, that back and forth. That's totally real. I read that I was like, that's solid. So you got a good ball rolling here. So
yeah, I usually know that if I read it back after not having looked at it for a couple days and I like internally chuckle or cringe, then I might have gotten it right.
uh yeah,
yes,
that's really true. When I was just bringing it up with my project Cosmos, I was looking at some of the dialogue, said that works. And I looked at some of the dialogue, and like, I wrote this months, years ago to being rewrote it months ago, and I'm like, no, that doesn't quite work. So yeah, I mean, there you go. How you feel about it is the guiding light of the dialogue. So yeah,
definitely.
you're super simpatico here. You got it.
It definitely does go back to like you're writing what you want to read, and that's what's going to make it mean something to someone else as well. So yeah, it's definitely your instinct is where the book stops, honestly, with all of this. And like Charles said, like we are the editors, we're the ones whose job it is to worry about all this. It's just your job to play and to understand what you're trying to say and be able to say it the way that fits with your conscience. So yeah, I will say for my list of things that jumped out at me as maybe something that in your next round of editing you'd look at. I have a big thing and then I have a few smaller examples. The big overarching thing kind of parallels what Charles was saying, but with a different language. So I was looking at the conflict. In every good story, there's conflict. We need like conflict is the engine of your story, and your story is good because it has conflict. But great stories layer multiple different bits of conflict. Um, so, for example, Alex's relationship with his mom seems perfect and sweet, but what if there's some kind of hidden resentment or regret, like Charles was saying? Um, Maybe some painful patterns that start to put strain on them. maybe it might be because you sowed some of these seeds when you mentioned that they moved back to this town and Alex left the community that he had finally built for himself because his mom wanted to go back home. So maybe there's something hidden there or something buried there that you can kind of sow seeds of that tension as those little details, those little breadcrumb clues that you start dropping that your readers are now picking up on. Another example might be Talavir sounds very picture perfect, but Alex doesn't belong there. You mentioned this in when you're talking about like the synopsis of your story. He doesn't belong there. So how do we start feeling the truth right from page one that he doesn't belong there? Is there maybe a dark secret that's hiding behind this picture perfect town? Is there little bits of details of tension that you can again start sewing? Because that will help your pacing. That'll like start you pulling on that rope to get your readers asking questions and following you along, and turning pages even faster. You kind of have to like focus on some mundane details just for the mechanics of it, like eating breakfast, waking up and getting ready in the morning, walking to work. Like all of these things are very technical, mundane details that you have to narrate. But if you don't put in little details there that like spark something else in our brains to pay attention, then your readers will start tuning out and skimming ahead and thinking that they already know this because they live mundane everyday lives. So they've seen this before, they've lived this before, they don't have to pay attention. But if you use those moments to sow those little seeds of like, here's a detail that maybe there's something more behind these few words that I just gave you. And if you have that feeling behind that detail, then now your readers are paying attention. So that's the big overall thing that kind of tied in with what Charles said is make sure that you have those breadcrumbs, those details that get at just twist it a little bit different from what we're always used to seeing and let there be something bigger behind it. And that's what's going to layer that conflict and keep your readers turning pages and clue them in that there's something bigger going on in this story and you have to pay attention because like it's coming. You're asking questions and I'm going to give you answers. Like just follow me along this story. So smaller things to kind of give specific examples for this. Right from the beginning, when he walks into the law firm and it says there is an elegant hum of the piano, almost put him at ease. And I wonder, because in my mind I was thinking, okay, he just woke up from a nightmare about a piano. So does a piano automatically put him on edge, even if he doesn't necessarily know it? Or does it just kind of slip into his subconscious until she starts playing the exact same tune that was in his dream? Another thing that I thought about was when he is in the car with her, Alex needs to give directions to his street before he just points out his house. Like he has to tell her which way to turn out at the parking lot. And I feel like this could be another opportunity for an awkward interruption just when they start patching things up. He has to interrupt with the directions. And this is something that I've experienced as like a very real awkward thing that no one seems to talk about is, riding in someone's car and trying to act like a socially normal human and have a conversation. And then you have to interrupt yourself with the directions right when you thought that you were saying something that totally hides what a socially awkward human you are. So those little details are like lean into those because they can do even more for you than you think. Another particular note, I wonder if there could even be more interesting conflicts between Alex and Katie's relationship. So, for example, what if Katie doesn't tell him about her father winning the lottery? Because she kind of mentioned, again, like you have the seeds here, she kind of mentions later that he was the only person that wasn't profiting off of her family's fortune, and so that was enough to make her give him a chance. But what if maybe she wants to keep that secret from him so that she doesn't have any reason to distrust his intentions for her? Because, maybe she was already worried that is he trying to ask me out? Is he coming at me with like a very entitled perspective of like he just deserves to ask me out because he's a male and I'm a female. So play into that a little bit more and drag that out a little more. Don't make it so easy for them to patch up that initial tension. Lean into that tension and explore it more, because that's another detail that's going to get your readers pulling along. Last thing, specifically, you asked the question about if your character's tones seemed consistent. And I think that is a great question. That's a question that shows that, like, you know exactly what you need to pay attention to as a writer that's telling a skillful story. A lot of people don't know how to ask those questions of, like, pay attention to consistency as far as tone goes, because that's something that seems so vague, but it's such an integral part of a good story. And the only note that I had about that was there were only a couple places where Alex's tone seems to flip flop back and forth between juvenile and adult. And that probably has to do with, you said you're rewriting it from he was initially a teenager and now he's adult. So that totally makes sense now, like why that those couple instances might not have been caught. But that's the only note that I had about that in the first few chapters that we got to read. So yeah, I think that's it. I know we just threw a lot at you. Do you have any thoughts or questions about any of that?
I mean, I'm actually really glad that you pointed out Alex having some initial worry was with Katie, because I completely rewrote her character. I found that she was in like the previous version of the story. She was very inconsistent, and I was almost like I was projecting onto her. Like I found that I didn't like her character, and I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I've written her like this. As I was coming back to it 3 years later. Um, but I'm glad you pointed out Alex, because I hadn't been looking as closely at him, and I will need to at some point. But that's good. That's good. I'm glad Katie's at least mostly holding it out.
I think you have some very good foundations here of characters that speak to something real and are therefore interesting. So yeah, keep going on. You're right where you need to be for this draft, like where it's at. Your first drafts aren't supposed to be perfect. So this is all just supposed to help you be getting to that next draft stage so that you are ready to publish it. But for where it's supposed to be right now, it's right where it's supposed to be. So you're already doing amazing. And I I will also say the second part of our disclaimer. We understand, we're writers ourselves. We know how scary it is to have our stuff edited and put yourself out there like that.
It is there, and as long as your editor is on your side trying to help you,
Yes.
you can take their advice as you need to. If you don't agree and it's just in your gut, then yeah, don't follow it. But like good editing will guide you to what you were trying to say. So if you
Mm.
agree, disagree, that's fine. Use this as knowledge then. Even if it's like they're completely wrong or they don't understand. Use that.
Mhm.
Show us, constantly continue the conversation until not even until you find a point. Maybe it's not really about finding a singular point. Maybe you just need to shine it better and better to where again you can finally look back and then go, ah, yes, there you go. So yeah, take this as you need it to be and use it as a guiding light rather than, finger wagging.
Yeah. We tried to be good editors at OBA and not the bad editors who are those finger waggers who just want your story to be what they want it to be and aren't interested in what you need it to be. So speaking of the theme of the story, this is what's underneath the core essence of what you are trying to say with this story. We have found in the writers that we've worked with, the books that we've helped get published, theme is the most important part of your story. It's the most important element because it holds everything else in your story together. So we like to take some time at the end of these episodes to see if we can find any threads that we can trace to that theme, because really strong books have that theme apparent from the first chapter. So we can throw out a couple ideas of what we saw, but I would love to hear from you what your idea of a theme was, and what you see as the core message of your book?
What a great question. See, now I haven't been in English class in a good many years now. Um,
That's okay.
Yeah.
so when I think of theme, I don't get, like an immediate list of perfect words, unfortunately. Um,
I think that the themes that mean something to us are messy and imperfect.
yeah. Well, I mean, I think the goal of the story, and it's hard. I don't know. It's so tricky with where 5,000 words is
Fair,
for what I could give you guys.
fair.
But I mean, I'm writing it for the sake of it's meant to be an exploration of humanity and human relationships
Mm.
just in a medieval setting with a fun conflict. But I don't know if that counts as a theme,
It
but
definitely does. If that is the conversation that you want your book to start at its core, that is the theme.
Yeah, a theme for me is something of what you take away when you close the book, turn off the movie, walk out of the theater. That's kind of the thing of like it's ideas of like what really strikes you, of what did you take away from it the most. I'm trying to think of a like example. Honestly, I think you already know that. Like that's and by know that I mean like you can think of a ton of different ideas and you know it in your heart what I'm talking about, where it's like you see an idea and that's what you take away. Actually, interesting example, I was just reminded that everyone and their mother apparently views The Lion King the great theme of like responsibility and politics, and I'm like I thought it was something completely different since I was a wee little lad in the late 90s, but apparently that's how everyone else. But again, that's what I take away from it. What is the ultimate point of the value for me? That's your theme.
And that's the interesting thing because we talk about theme. And in English class, I remember being sat down and said, like, write out in this one sentence what the theme of the book is. And if you don't get it right, if you don't say what the teacher said, then you are wrong. But in reality, everyone reads a story with a different perspective, and the story takes on a life of its own once it's published, and it speaks to everyone differently. And I think that what everyone feels is the story's theme is ultimately going to be a little bit different from what you wrote it to be the theme as, and that's the magic. That's why stories are alive, because they speak differently to everyone. So, for example, some things that I saw from these first few chapters, I did see a little bit of the discussion coming out of everything in the world is connected more so than you think. I did see that conversation started with his nightmare having connections to the real world and this fantasy world having connections to the real world, and his history having a connection to Katie's history. So like all of these things kind of built on the idea that this world is more connected. There's more threads of connection than you would initially think. To that point, there's more hiding under everything normal. You have a picturesque town, but there's obviously something more hiding under it. And something that I also thought about, and this was particularly from the detail of his shirt that he wore on this date. It said, "Embrace discomfort." And I thought that was a really cool detail that kind of spoke to his character and his character development. Also, something I could relate to because, again, like, sounds like a great thing, but also, like, you wear that shirt and then you immediately just feel more uncomfortable. And I think that that's something that's so real. But what I saw coming out as a theme was our fear can be a gateway. So we started with Alex in this nightmare feeling like a helpless little boy. We end with him willingly entering into the nightmare. And so I feel like that's something that could also be a really powerful discussion that people might come away from this story willing to have. Charles, did you see anything else pop out at you for a theme?
The thing that I found compelling is jumping from that point is when Kitty and Alex are talking and they're talking about needing a little bit more in life, a little bit more than just the town. And we've seen stories about it where like, the Bruce Springsteen got to get out of this town sort of shtick. But in here, again, presented very simplistically, very quietly, very honestly. And I deeply relate to that. And the reason why I love this being about adults is for various socio-economical reasons. The idea presented by media, um, specifically was zero in on storytelling narratives, is young people find themselves come of age and then they're baked and ready to go out into the world normally. And adults don't have problems except for, the stupid things that you find in every single adult book. This can be garbage. Adults, for various reasons, one of them being just being stuck in situations that they can't escape. Not even toxic ones, just ones that are not fulfilling and trapping. They can feel like they need to be somewhere else, that they need something else. And I got that instantly. And it encouraged because sometimes you kind of wonder, like, why are these characters going to chase after something? Is it boredom? And that's how it can kind of feel sometimes in these sorts of stories. Here, though, we're just having this conversation about maybe needing a little bit more, that maybe something is missing and they're afraid of what that means. Of course, they would go check on a wolf. They would go check on a dog, something strange. And embracing the fact that adults are like that, very important. And I think that's fantastic to see, um, and to read. And that was kind of a major theme of there, that search for that missing thing that you can't quite get, or something or actually, I would say, perhaps, and this is not exclusive in any capacity, but perhaps as a younger person, you're missing something, or at least that's what you think. But as an adult, you've lost something. That's what it feels like. You have lost something that you were trying to get back. The whole tangled, bring back what once was mine, that kind of feeling. That was the vibe of ideas, the central thing I was picking up from. So when you made your pitch, totally made sense. Absolutely made sense. So that's what I took of value from the sample that I had.
Yeah. Did any of these ideas spark any further ideas for you, Kennedy?
Kind of. I I mean, I like all of them. I like that those are the vibes that it's giving because I didn't necessarily write it with a theme in mind. I wanted to write it because I wanted to understand myself and I wanted to understand my friends and I wanted to understand the world. And I started that when I started writing it,
Mm.
which is why they started out as teenagers. But I'm an adult now and I still feel that way. And that's why I rewrote it is because I feel like it's so lost in a lot of stories that you can still be that way, that you can still have that, or you can still come of age, or you can still discover something. Um, so it really, I was a philosophy major. This might contribute to why why I find the study itself of humanity and these searches to be so compelling. But yeah, so it's like all of that kind of goes into what I want for the story. I just didn't necessarily have the word theme wrapped up the way that it usually is.
You absolutely do not need to have one. You are not here to present a grand philosophical presentation of an idea. You're here to tell the story. The theme, ideas, they will come, when they need to. Maybe you will never find it, but someone else will. Maybe you will find it halfway through the story. Maybe you will find something halfway then, and then you decide I have to change the ending, or something has come further forth. It will come to you when it is good and ready. Do not worry about it. Tell the story. So you're completely fine. Vibes is really a state of being at the moment. That's a-okay.
Yeah. I
Good. Good.
I really love what you said, that you wrote this story to understand yourself, your friends, and the world and humanity. I think that speaks so strongly to writing being therapy in and of itself. That's part of why writing is such an all-consuming and emotionally exhausting, but also renewing, almost like a spiritual experience, because it is therapy. It's you processing things. And I've related to the quote that I don't know what I think until I see it written on the page. So in that sense, this story, that's where it's born. So again, it's right where it needs to be. The theme really is just to give you a why for why you are writing this story. And for someone else, for a reader, once you look at publishing your story, the theme is going to be their why, for why are they reading this story. So your theme itself, if you're looking at it as like my theme is my why, it's my purpose for writing and for going through this very intense experience to tell a story and tell it well. Your why is to understand the world and understand humanity. Um, and I think, again, like we said from the very beginning of this episode, someone also needs to see that. And they need to read your book for the same reason that you need to write it. And that's where the magic of theme comes in. That's why we say that it's so foundational to your story. Even if it's not apparent to you in this stage of the drafting process, it's still very core to your story because it's your why, because it gives you that reason for why you're going through the trouble to tell this story. And then once you're looking at publishing, it's going to be the thing that from page one, from chapter one all the way to the last chapter, it's whispering to the reader like, this is why you need to read this story. This is why it's important that you pay attention. This is why it's important that you turn the page. So that's a better explanation of what we mean when we talk about theme. I know it's a little bit different from what they teach in English class. I didn't find what they taught in English class to be any bit of help to me, but that's just me. um, but yeah, I guess that wraps up the section on the emotional resonance that we felt from the story. I know that you had some specific questions in your application, in your form. I'm curious if you have any more questions that we didn't answer, and if there was one question that we could answer that's like keeping you awake at night about your story, what would that be?
The only question that has mattered to me, so I've gotten some of my friends to read these first few chapters as I'm rewriting them. And I say rewriting loosely because there's still a lot of summary in there. But I just want to know if you picked it up, if you read the prologue, if you read the first chapter, like would you keep reading it? And I feel like now is a really good time to ask that question because it's still in such a moldable state.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I've more or less said that in detail, so I will simply say yes because I've seen this kind of stuff before, but again, I think you presented it in a different kind of way. And if you can keep pushing that different kind of way to where it doesn't feel like I'm just reading another book in another bookstore and another shelf, but something a little bit more distinct that's actually going to belong to me, join with me. Yeah.
Yep, for sure. I would say yes with a really tiny but, and that but being keep, again, like Charles said, keep pushing to make your details come alive and let them be the clues to your why, because that's ultimately what's going to make your book worth reading to readers. That's what makes them turn the page. That's what makes them read past chapter one. So kind of like what we already said, if you implement that and keep pushing to tell the story that is alive to you, and isn't just checking technical boxes, then I think that the answer will be a resounding yes.
Okay. All right. All right. I'll take that. I'll
Okay.
take that.
Yeah. Well, round of applause to you. Thank you so much for joining us, for taking the time. Thank you so much for putting in the work and being brave enough to share this story with us. I know it's really hard to trust strangers on the internet to just tell them, hey, here's this story that came straight from my heart, rip it apart. That takes a lot of guts. And so we very much are grateful and applaud you for that. I'm excited to see where else this story goes. For anyone listening, if you found any helpful tips for your works in progress, or you have any questions about the story that you're working on, come on the show. We've got a link in the show notes. and you can submit your own story and we can talk about it on the show and help you find a way to tell it and tell the version that's worth telling. Um, so thank you for listening. This was Let's Fix Stories. Leave any comments below of what you thought, what you've learned through the writing process, and we will talk to you next week.